The price of crossing the line, the gold-leafed banner of the Galactic Coalition, hung heavy over the mahogany table in the colony's central orbital pavilion. Outside the panoramic window, 6 heavy dreadnoughts of the Coalition fleet drifted in tight, menacing formation, their weapon pods open, their targeting arrays humming with suppressive energy. At the head of the delegation stood Grand Marshal Vale, his segmented shell glistening with the sharp, artificial light of the pavilion. His 4 eyes remained fixed on Ambassador David Chen, a middle-aged human dressed in an unadorned grey suit, who sat calmly stirring a ceramic cup of tea. "You have exceeded your industrial allocation by 300%, Ambassador," Vale declared, his synthetic voice translator crackling with administrative authority. Under Article 9 of the Rim Accord, border colonies of third-tier species are restricted to suborbital manufacturing and low-density energy grids. Your planetary core tapping operations are illegal. Your automated processing arrays are illegal. David set his spoon down with a soft, delicate click. "Grand Marshal, this is a frontier world. Tapping the core is the only way we can power our water filtration units and climate stabilizers for 2 million civilians. We aren't building weapons. We are keeping our children warm." "Intent is irrelevant," Vale snapped, extending a data slate across the polished wood. "The Coalition cannot allow an unmonitored species to hoard such vast energy reserves on our perimeter. You will immediately sever the mantle lines, disable your automated arrays, and submit your colony to full occupational oversight." David looked down at the slate, then back up into Vale's 4 impassive eyes. "And if we refuse to freeze in the dark?" "Then my fleet will sever the lines for you," Vale replied coldly, "from orbit, with plasma fire." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the chamber. The human aides behind David shifted uncomfortably, their hands white-knuckled against their folders. But David did not flinch. He simply let out a long, quiet sigh, reaching into his inner jacket pocket to pull out a small glass memory module. "For 80 years, David said softly, placing the glass module on the table, "humanity has signed every document your assembly handed us. We paid your tariffs. We abided by your tonnage limits. We let your inspectors walk through our dockyards because we genuinely believed in the promise of a peaceful galaxy." He tapped the glass module. A soft, crimson holographic projection bloomed above the mahogany table, not a schematic of a factory or a power grid, but a deep space sensor map of the entire sector. "What is this?" Vale demanded, his mandibles twitching in irritation. "More administrative delays." "This is Project Aegis Zero," David said, his voice dropping into a flat, absolute register that made the Coalition officers behind Vale stiffen. 60 years ago, our deep space survey teams realized that your Coalition wasn't the only power lurking in this arm of the galaxy. We found the remnants of the Vorakai, a nomadic, hyper-predatory fleet that consumes whole stellar systems. We calculated their vector. We realized they would reach this sector right about now." Vale let out a sharp, clicking laugh. "The Vorakai are a myth, old spacer tales designed to frighten young hatchlings." "They aren't a myth, Grand Marshal," David replied quietly. "They are currently 30 light-minutes out, drifting past the Kuiper boundary of this system. 2,000 capital-class war barges." Vale's laughter died instantly. He gestured sharply to his tactical officer, who began frantically tapping at his console. A second later, the officer's face went completely pale, his scales flushing a sickly gray. "Grand Marshal," the officer choked out, his voice trembling. "Deep sensors, wideband gravity disruptions at the perimeter, thousands of massive contacts. They match no known Coalition signatures." "Why didn't our early warning boys trigger?" Vale shouted, spinning around. "Why wasn't the fleet alerted?" "Because your boys run on Coalition power protocols," David said, leaning back in his chair. The energy you've been demanding we dismantle isn't powering water filters, Vale. It's powering a subspace localized gravimetric siphon. David tapped the table, and the holographic map zoomed in on the human colony world below. Deep within the planet's mantle, 6 massive subterranean arrays, fed by the core's immense thermal energy, were generating an invisible spherical distortion field that spanned 20 light hours. For 30 years, David explained smoothly, this colony hasn't been a farm, it has been a lighthouse lens. That core tap bends the space-time signature of this entire sector, casting a localized stealth shadow over your 6 dreadnoughts, your trade lanes, and our 2 million civilians. To the Vorakai, this entire star system looks like empty, barren void. Vale stared at the projection, his mind racing as the brutal reality of the situation washed over him. You've been hiding us. We've been hiding everyone, David corrected gently, including your grand fleet. But maintaining a gravimetric shroud of this scale requires immense power. Every watt we pull from the core goes directly into keeping that cloak active. David picked up his pen and pointed it at the mandate's slate Vale had placed on the table. So, Grand Marshal, here is your choice, David said, his eyes locking onto Vale's with an unshakable, terrifying calm. You can execute your treaty mandate. You can order your fleet to fire on our mantle lines and sever our power. The moment those lines drop, the cloak collapses. David leaned forward, his voice a low, steady whisper that echoed off the glass walls of the pavilion. And 2,000 Vorakai warbarges will instantly see 6 very loud, very shiny coalition dreadnoughts sitting in the open. Do we sign the paper, or do you want to test your plasma batteries against a species that eats star systems for breakfast? Grand Marshal Vale stood frozen, his hand hovering inches above the slate. Outside the window, his 6 massive dreadnoughts drifted silently in the dark, completely oblivious to the swarm of leviathans passing just beyond the invisible veil. Slowly, deliberately, Vale pulled the slate back. The coalition, Vale stammered, his synthetic translator struggling to match his frantic breathing, hereby grants this colony a permanent industrial exemption under Article 12, for security considerations. David smiled, picking up his teacup once more. A wise administrative decision, Grand Marshal. Please enjoy the rest of your stay in Terran space. Grand Marshal Vale did not remain in the orbital pavilion for pleasantries. Within 5 minutes of rescinding the mandate, the coalition delegation had boarded their shuttle and returned to the flagship Vindicator. On the human colony world below, deep within the subterranean control vaults beneath the mantle tappers, Chief Engineer Sarah Vance watched the energy readout stabilize on her main glass display. The coalition fleet is pulling back primary targeting locks, Sarah reported through her headset, her fingers dancing across the luminescent console. Their shields are dropping back to standard cruising thresholds. They're backing off, David. Up in the pavilion, David Chen stood alone by the vast panoramic window, watching the 6 massive coalition dreadnoughts realign their thrusters and slowly drift toward the outer perimeter of the harbor. They aren't leaving, Sarah, David replied softly into his lapel comm. Vale's pride won't let him retreat to the core worlds empty-handed. He's going to park his fleet at the edge of the system to monitor us. That's a problem, Sarah said, her voice growing tense. The Vorakai vanguard is still skirting the Kuiper boundary. The shroud is holding, but if Vale pushes his active long-range sensors to maximum to figure out what we're doing, the electromagnetic spillover could pierce the refraction layer. Can you tighten the focal beam? David asked, watching the distant blue tail flares of the coalition dreadnoughts. Not without pulling another 20% from the core, Sarah answered. And if I do that, the tectonic plates under the southern continent are going to start grinding. Will trigger localized quakes in the civilian sectors. David rubbed his temples, feeling the dull, familiar ache of a man balancing millions of lives on a razor's edge. Keep the mantle drawer stable. Don't touch the civilian grids. Let me handle Vale. 20 minutes later, a high-priority, encrypted subspace channel pinged on David's personal console. He tapped the screen, and the miniature holoprojection of Grand Admiral Vale flickered to life. The alien marshal was back on his bridge, surrounded by the chaotic flurry of his bridge officers, his four eyes narrowing as he glared at the human diplomat. "Ambassador Chen," Vale began, his synthetic translator dropping into a suspicious, low rumble. "My tactical officers have spent the last 15 minutes analyzing your sensor logs. The energy signatures you claim are the Vorakai. They are strangely consistent, almost too consistent." David maintained a calm, polite expression. "Consistency is a hallmark of military fleet formations, Grand Marshal. Or a hallmark of a very sophisticated holographic array," Vale countered, leaning closer to his transmitter. "You expect me to believe that a third-tier border species managed to construct a sector-wide gravimetric cloak and detect a legendary horde that our own imperial arrays missed entirely? It is far more likely that humanity is running an elaborate counterintelligence illusion to protect an illegal mining operation." David didn't answer immediately. He picked up his ceramic teacup, took a measured sip, and set it down. "Marshal Vale," David said quietly, "are you asking me for proof?" "I am demanding a live sensor verification of the contacts," Vale snapped, "or I will order my fleet to resume full occupational enforcement of Article 9. David let out a soft, tired breath. He looked down at his console and keyed a direct line to the outer sensor buoys stationed near the Kuiper boundary. "Vale, I am going to open a localized 3-second window in the gravimetric shroud," David said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Just a single microscopic pinhole in our cloak, directed right at your flagship's forward sensor array." "A 3-second window," Vale sneered. "What could that possibly—" "Do not broadcast," David interrupted, his gaze locking onto the holoprojection with terrifying intensity. "Do not ping them, do not charge your weapons, just watch your raw optical feed." David tapped a single command into his console. 14 light-minutes away, deep in the frozen darkness of the Kuiper belt, a single humped array of tungsten and smart glass adjusted its aperture by 2 millimeters. A microscopic rift opened in the invisible gravimetric veil. On the bridge of the Vindicator, the central holotank suddenly flickered. The simulated tactical grid vanished, replaced by a raw, unedited optical feed from the flagship's high-magnification forward cameras. The black void of space was not empty. Passing through the outer rim, moving in a silent, suffocating parade of geometric terror, were thousands of Leviathan hulls. They were not made of refined alloy or polished metal. They were carved from dark, jagged asteroid ice and bound together by glowing, biomechanical tendrils. Each warbarge was 6 kilometers long, trailing thick plumes of crimson radiation that ate through the dark like acid. They moved with the effortless, terrifying coordination of a locust swarm, so vast that their collective mass was subtly warping the light of the background stars. And right at the edge of the optical frame, one of the leading Leviathans, a mountain-sized beast bristling with jagged, crystalline spires, slowly turned its forward sensor node toward the direction of the pinhole. A single, low-frequency gravitational pulse rippled through space, causing the Vindicator's bridge displays to violently distort and flicker with static. 3 seconds expired. David tapped his console, and the pinhole snapped shut. The optical feed collapsed back into the soft, empty blue of the local star chart. On the bridge of the Vindicator, absolute silence reigned. Officers stood frozen at their consoles, their mandibles slack, their scales drained of all color. Vale himself had backed away from the holotank, his 4 eyes wide with raw, primal horror. The holo projection of David Chen remained calm and undisturbed in the center of the quiet bridge. "Did your sensors receive sufficient data, Grand Marshal?" David asked softly. Vale swallowed hard, his synthetic translator emitting a high-pitched, metallic whine as he struggled to find his voice. They are real," Vale whispered, his 4 eyes darting frantically across his console. "They are right outside." "They have been right outside for 3 days," David replied. "And every time your fleet fires up its high-yield reactors or broadcasts administrative mandates, you ripple the veil. We are working very hard down here to keep you invisible, Vale. I suggest you make your fleet very, very quiet." Vale stared at the human diplomat, the last vestiges of his imperial pride evaporating into the cold air of his bridge. "All ships," Vale choked out, turning to his communications officer with trembling hands. "Engage total electronic silence. Power down all primary targeting arrays. Drop sublight drive output to minimum idle." "A wise administrative adjustment," David said, offering a polite, dignified nod. "We will maintain the shroud. Have a peaceful evening, Grand Marshal." The transmission cut out. David leaned back in his chair, looking out the panoramic window at the Coalition fleet as its brilliant energy signatures dimmed one by one, slipping into the dark. Down below, the world kept turning, its core pulsing with warm, life-giving power, holding the line between 2 terrifying forces in a quiet, fragile galaxy. For 12 hours, the system existed in a state of suspended breath. The 6 massive Coalition dreadnoughts floated at the edge of the harbor like darkened iron monuments, their running lights doused, their high-yield fusion cores throttled down to a faint, imperceptible trickle. On the colony world below, the 2 million human inhabitants went about their day, blissfully unaware that a fleet of star-eating leviathans was currently gliding through the outer reaches of their sky, separated from them only by a thin, mathematical distortion of spacetime. Inside the subterranean command vault beneath the planetary mantle, Chief Engineer Sarah Vance monitored the gravimetric field density. "The Vorakai Vanguard is clearing the 2nd orbital vector," Sarah reported over the comms, her voice tight with exhaustion. "Their trailing edge is 80 light-seconds past the Kuiper boundary. Another 6 hours, and their primary fleet will be out of detection range entirely." Up in the orbital pavilion, David Chen stood by the glass, holding an untouched cup of cold tea. "And the shroud?" "Holding steady at 98% efficiency," Sarah said. "Though the thermal load on the core tappers is pushing our heat sinks to the limit. If we have to keep the mantle arrays running at full capacity for another day, we're going to have to vent excess steam into the upper atmosphere." "No venting," David said instantly. "A thermal plume that large will create an infrared flare across 3 light hours. Keep it bottled up, Sarah. We absorb the heat." Before Sarah could reply, a low, urgent warning chime pulsed on David's personal desk console. It wasn't a signal from the mantle tappers, nor was it a ping from the Coalition. It was an automated wideband alert from a deep space stealth buoy anchored near the system's trailing jump gate. A single, small ship had just dropped out of sublight at the edge of the sector. David's brow furrowed as he keyed the telemetry onto his glass display. The vessel was tiny, a fast, long-range diplomatic courier bearing the gilded crest of the Galactic Coalition Prime Ministry. It was broadcasting a high-energy, unencrypted subspace burst across all commercial frequencies, searching for Grand Marshal Vale's flagship. "Priority directive to Fleet Command," the courier's automated signal screamed into the void, its broad-spectrum transmission cutting through the silent sector like a flare in a dark room. Grand Marshal Vale is ordered to immediately report the status of the Terran sector enforcement. High Assembly demands live telemetry of the human industrial shutdown. David's heart plummeted into his stomach. Sarah, drop a localized jammer over that courier right now. I'm trying, Sarah shouted over the line, her fingers flying across her console. But their signal was pre-buffered. It hit the sector at maximum broadcast yield. 14 light-minutes away, at the edge of the Kuiper belt, the trailing edge of the Vorakai armada reacted. The massive, biomechanical leviathan that had previously glided past the system suddenly froze in its orbital vector. Its dark, crystalline spires ignited with a violent, sickening violet glow. Slowly, deliberately, the 6-kilometer mountain of jagged ice and metal swung its heavy forward prow around, its biosynthetic sensors locking directly onto the source of the high-frequency burst. On the bridge of the Vindicator, Grand Marshal Vale watched in horror as his tactical displays lit up with crimson warning icons. "The courier," Vale stammered, his mandibles clicking frantically as he stared at the screen. "The fools in the capital sent a courier." "Ambassador Chen," Vale's voice erupted through David's console, laced with raw, unadulterated panic. "The lead Vorakai warbarge has altered course. It is accelerating directly toward the courier's jump point. It will intersect our position in 4 minutes. David didn't waste time cursing the coalition bureaucracy. He slammed his palm onto the main vault, override control. "Sarah," David said, his voice dropping into a deadly, ice-cold calm. "Disengage the localized stealth cloak over the sector." "What?" Sarah gasped through the comms. "David, if I drop the shroud, the entire Vorakai fleet will see the colony." "They won't see the colony," David replied sharply. "Reconfigure the gravimetric tappers. I don't want a cloak anymore, I want a lens." A lens?" Sarah paused, then her eyes widened in realization. "You want to bend the courier's broadcast." "I want you to take all the thermal energy we've been bottling up in the planetary mantle," David ordered, "and dump it directly into the subspace emitter. Focus the entire gravitational refraction footprint of this planet into a single point, 50 light-seconds behind the Vorakai vanguard." In the subterranean depths, beneath the human world, 6 massive subterranean arrays groaned as their magnetic dampers opened. Billions of gigawatts of raw geothermal energy surged through the smart carbon conductors, channeling the heat of a planet's living heart into the subspace array. Outside in the void, the space-time fabric around the system didn't just bend, it warped into a massive, invisible mirror. The high-energy signal from the coalition courier hit the gravimetric lens and was instantly swallowed, redirected, and amplified 1,000-fold, projecting a massive, phantom electromagnetic signature into the empty void 50 light-seconds away from the colony and the coalition fleet. To the Vorakai warbarge, the signal didn't come from a small human system or 6 hidden dreadnoughts. It appeared as a massive, overflowing energy grid floating out in the empty, open dark of deep space. The 6-kilometer biomechanical leviathan paused. Its crystalline spires flared once more, and then, with terrifying speed, it fired its primary sublight thrusters, veering violently away from the Terran system to pursue the phantom echo in the dark. The entire trailing swarm followed in its wake, sweeping away from the sector like a flock of birds pursuing a distant shadow. On the bridge of the Vindicator, Vale stood paralyzed, watching the crimson signatures drift further and further away from his fleet until they finally vanished into the deep space lanes. Inside the orbital pavilion, the heavy silence returned. David Chen stood by the glass, watching the distant courier vessel as its subspace drives finally cut out, silenced by the colony's localized jamming sweep. He took a slow, deep breath, adjusting his grey suit jacket, and picked up his long-forgotten cup of cold tea. His console chimed. The holo-projection of Grand Marshal Vale flickered to life. The alien commander looked utterly broken, his 4 eyes wide, his scales dull and drained of color. "Ambassador," Vale whispered, his synthetic translator barely producing a sound. You bent space itself to save us." "We didn't do it to save you, Grand Marshal," David said quietly, looking down at the alien commander with calm, steady eyes. "We did it because we like our privacy, and because we have 2 million people down there who deserve to wake up tomorrow morning." David tapped a command on his desk, bringing up the administrative mandates slate one last time and transferring it to Vale's display. "Now, Marshal," David added softly, "I suggest you take your courier, return to your High Assembly, and inform them that Sector Terran 4 is officially closed to administrative inspections. Permanently." Vale stared at the human diplomat for a long moment. Then, slowly, the proud commander of the Coalition fleet bowed his head in a deep, unreserved gesture of absolute respect. The mandate is cancelled," Vale said softly. "May the void keep your border quiet, Ambassador." "It usually does," David replied with a small, tired smile, "as long as people remember where the line is drawn." Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.